Hi, everyone. I'm Renee Morales, Director of Enrollment and Parent Customer Service here at Kids & Company. Thank you all so much for joining today's webinar. We would like to welcome Tristan Kuhlman, President of PFLAG Canada, York Region. PFLAG is an entirely volunteer-led LGBTQ2 support, education, and resource network. The network exists both in US and in Canada with chapters in both countries that offer similar resources. They are the first and largest organization dedicated to supporting, educating, and advocating for LGBTQ+ people and their families. At an early age, children may ask questions that can surprise us or request toys or clothing that may be unexpected. In today's Kidco Talk, Tristan will talk about how we can better prepare ourselves as parents and caregivers for these types of conversations. Tristan will also talk about how the parent and caregiver community can support one another. Just a note to let all our families know joining today that in our classrooms, when we talk about pride, the focus is on love, kindness, and embracing diversity. The topic of this webinar and the discussion we'll have today is not discussed in our classrooms. Today's webinar is, as you know, optional, and we're happy to be able to provide the resource for families that may find it relevant. So we're thrilled to have Tristan join us today. If you have any questions throughout this session, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will ensure that your questions will be addressed at the end of today's session. So Tristan, it's over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for spending your lunch hour with us and to learn a little bit more about supporting your kids as they grow older, whether they turn out to be queer, whether they're allies. I think it's incredibly important to cover off these topics so that we support everyone in our communities and in our classrooms. So I'm going to begin sharing my screen. And we'll play the presentation. All righty. And so the title of our presentations today, Queer Conversations Fostering a Safe Environment for Your Child. And we're going to be going over quite a little bit today. We're going to jam pack a lot of stuff into our presentation, and hopefully there's some really strong takeaways for you all. We don't want to assume anyone is on a particular, or they know quite a bit about our community. So we're going to go through a little bit of an LGBT 101 just to provide everyone with the baseline of, what are the differences between sexual orientation, romantic orientation, gender identity, gender expression. What is it that we are specifically talking about here when it comes to queer identities? Then it's important to maybe talk a little bit about the fears that you might have around these conversations. It can certainly be, a very interesting journey to go through that or to be confronted with it. So we want to be transparent about that. We want to talk about what's at stake for our kids too. It's incredibly important. There's a reason why it's important to have these conversations and try to educate yourselves as parents. And then we're going to talk about strategies around that as well. So aligning with your partner, building a toolbox, we're raising our army of allies, and we'll have a quick Q&A with Renee as well. Alrighty, so when we're talking about gender identity and gender expression are really about one's concept of themselves and how they want to express that to the world. So does someone identify with being a man or a woman within the constructs that we know of as gender, or maybe outside of that as well? And we know what those constructs look like to us because some of us feel the pressure to express ourselves within those constructs daily. Men to appear or to dress more masculine, trimming our facial hair, or perhaps not, trimming our hair, things like that. Women with makeup, with how they might feminize their look. The hourglass look, all that kind of stuff. Those are all societal pressures that we have all experienced, or many of us have experienced or have had to combat in expressing our gender identity and gender expression. And some of us are very comfortable with expressing ourselves within those constructs of gender. But some people are not, and that's where there are some identities for folks who want to better express how they do identify as. So folks who are transgender, folks who are non-binary, genderqueer, gender fluid, you might have heard those terms before, but those are all identities of folks who are looking to express their gender identity and their gender expression in a way that is not the norm, that is not within those boxes of man and woman. And yeah. So when we talk about sexual orientation and also romantic orientation in there, this is about who we're attracted to based on gender identity, gender expression. Sometimes those things ebb and flow amongst one another too. So using myself as an example with everything that we have in front of us here, I identify as a man, so I'm a cis man, so the sex that I was assigned at birth as really matches and corresponds with the gender identity that's most associated with that. And I'm gay. So my sexual and romantic orientation means that I'm both physically and romantically attracted to men, and thankfully a really wonderful and supportive partner too. So yeah, and so hopefully that gives us the baseline that of our community that some of you might be seeking and might need some clarification on there. And we have this slide that we like to use. It's developed by a trans coalition, a trans student education resource center. And we think it does a really great job of illustrating that though, identity is incredibly important to folks, and it's incredibly important to use a word to express yourself so people can have an idea of understanding how to support you. So we call this the gender unicorn. And we think it does a great job of illustrating just how identities within our queer community are also on a spectrum as well. It can be really difficult for folks to come to terms with their identity and to really then truly discover what it is that they would like to identify as. And sometimes living within an identity, it takes a little bit of time to truly understand that this is something that is really for me. And some folks, they end up changing their identity because they're trying to figure out and discover what best works for them. So that's why we like to say that a lot of identities, whether it be gender identity, gender expression, and even who you're physically and romantically attracted to, is on a spectrum, because queer folks are really just trying to figure things out for themselves and how to, how they fit into the world. And so, with all of that, more, I would say, basic 101 level information, it can be difficult to then be confronted with situations where you might have to start answering some questions, whether it be amongst parents, whether it be with your kids. These are perhaps the conversations or types of conversations that parents fear the most getting into, because you don't want to get it wrong, but you also might feel like you're not educated enough or not informed enough to go through these conversations. And there's certainly a way to get around all of those feelings that we're going to go through today in building our toolkit. So it's important to first acknowledge that we all really want what's best for our kids. And sometimes that fear comes from a place of, saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, and concern around there being long-lasting impacts with your kids and with how they age and how they grow up. And that is a very valid thing to think, but also kids are very resilient too. My mom and I, we went through our rows, but our relationship really couldn't be stronger. And I think as long as you're leading with what you want, what's best for your kid, but also are very supportive and positive with them too, that there's a lot of good that can come from those moments too. So don't be too worried about getting something wrong at some point. Everyone will at some point. No one's going to be perfect with these types of conversations, but as long as your heart is led from the right place, you're going to land in the right place. It's important, again, to be guided with your intentions of what you want best for your child. And if you're in a position to really reconcile, your own feelings around the queer community, or having difficulty around how to express your feelings around the queer community in a positive way and queer lived experiences, it's important to try to go on your own learning journey first, or to maybe acknowledge to your child that you might not be ready to answer a question, but you're going to do your best to get there for them, and you will get back to them on that. It's also important to acknowledge that learning journey too can also coexist with your child as well. Parents don't have all the answers. We certainly don't have all the answers at PFLAG sometimes, but it's okay to go along that learning journey. I don't know, let's find out is a great, pivot to that, and really taking the journey with your child can be a really beautiful thing. And again, just accepting the fact that you will make mistakes, but you need to be resilient around those mistakes. So what's really at stake here, and why is this such an important topic to talk about, to be educated about, and to really prepare yourself for? The reality is that LGBTQ2IA folks do tend to have lower or poorer mental health and physical health outcomes than cisgendered heterosexual individuals for a variety of reasons. We could do another presentation on that, and we have before. It's certainly quite a massive topic to talk about, but in general, that's something that I think is very important to know, that there are poor health outcomes that are associated with these communities. And these communities are increasingly under attack, both in the US and Canada. We've seen it in the news in the US more so lately with laws that are targeting our queer communities and what we can share in schools and what we can share even in the home as well sometimes is being restricted. In Canada, we've seen that a little bit in New Brunswick over the last week as well, which is incredibly disturbing for our community. Characteristics and behaviors of allyship are incredibly important as well. These conversations aren't just about supporting queer kids. It's about arming all kids with the ideas that are going to, allow them to support others in their communities. Ideas that are really aligned, with the tenets of the Kidco way. When we talk about kindness, we talk about innovation, the need to be diverse, courageous, and optimistic. Those are all really strong tenets of allyship, and they're also really strong tenets of and keys to success for folks as they go through and navigate life. We want people to be able to support others, and that's just going to allow them to better navigate life and allow others to, or in their circles, to navigate their journeys as well. It's also important to think about your child's own sense of belonging in school and an educational environment too, because when the barriers are broken down of them having to think about their own identity and how they fit in amongst other folks from a social perspective, and all of that is broken down, students tend to achieve stronger educational success because they can focus on their education and they can focus on what they're most passionate about and what they want to learn, and getting creative in those spaces. And so when they don't have to think about their identity or how they fit in, they can concentrate on their education, and some beautiful outcomes can happen from there. A sense of belonging and support in society also leads to better health outcomes, as we know with our community, in particular, when we talk about trans and non-binary folks as they age, when they're connected to supportive environments, when they're connected to resources, they have much stronger mental health outcomes. In particular, rates of suicidal ideation, for example, cut at least in half, and it's incredible just the amount of positive what positive support can have for these communities. And it's also important to build a foundation of support early on in life too, for kids to really know what these behaviors of allyship look like and how to begin to mimic them in their communities through your leadership. And so very particular, I know that this is a study based in Canada, but a lot of this information can really be translated into what's happening in the US as well. And there are similar studies that really echo a lot of these points in the US. So Egal Canada, they're an organization that does a lot of advocacy and research for the queer community on a national level. And every couple years, they do a school survey where they ask students to participate in that survey and to answer questions, both straight kids and kids who are questioning or may identify within the community. And this is just a highlight of their recent survey that was out in 2021, where they found that 64% of all participants reported still hearing homophobic comments daily or weekly in school. 30% of 2S LGBTQ respondents had been victims of cyberbullying compared to 8% of cisgendered heterosexual respondents, so a very big disparity there. 57% of trans respondents had been targets of mean rumors or lies, and 79% of trans students who had been victims of physical harassment reported that teachers or staff were ineffective in addressing transphobic harassment. And in particular nowadays, in what you're seeing in the world too, it's mostly non-binary and trans folks and trans communities that are being targeted now. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and when you have a lot of misinformation or these groups being the little known about in terms of cultural competencies and education and items like that, it's very easy to create misconceptions around these identities and these communities, and we're seeing that increase more than ever before. So in arming yourself to build your toolkit, you also have to build the team around you. And this is something that a lot of people don't think about in the moment, but it's important to begin to align with your partner about how you might deal with certain situations if they do come up in your life. And especially with your child, it's important for you and your partner to be on the same page with a lot of things when it concerns your child, but in particular when it comes to supporting a queer lived experience. This is truly key because you want you and your partner to be on the same page, you want to support your partner, but you also want to be able to support your kids as well. So ideally, you've already had that conversation, but if not, it's probably a good time to do that, whether it's Pride Month or outside of it. I think it's important to begin these conversations. What if Kate says that she's gay down the road? Or what if my child wants to, purchase a toy? We're going down, we're shopping around in the store, we see a toy and it's a toy that perhaps you wouldn't buy for them or think that immediately they would want, perhaps something that doesn't exactly align with a toy that a girl or a boy might traditionally choose to play with, or perhaps clothing as well. It's also important to begin to understand how your family members might react as well. It takes a village to raise a child, and some of you might already have other family members engaged in that caregiving process, whether it's your own parents, whether it's aunts and uncles, or other folks who are close in your family circles. And I think it's important to bring them into those conversations as well, and to think about how they might react, because if they're going to be, in your child's life and supporting them, then it's probably important to know that if something were to happen in front of them, or if your child would ask them a question, you would know how they would respond and what your child would be exposed to in a response. So we reviewed these tips last year with, we had a sex educator join PFLAG a little while ago and brought us some really good tips in entering conversations with your kids. And you can even apply this to conversations with your family members as well. And these are just things to keep in mind if you do ever begin to get those questions. So it's important, number one, don't panic. Questions like that can really catch you off guard. But kids are inquisitive. At this point, you might already be getting questions that have caught you off guard in humorous ways and maybe not so humorous ways, and you've already been in that position. And parents who have had kids who have already grown up already know what that journey looks like. But don't panic. It's natural for kids to want to ask these questions, and you're likely going to be the first person that they come to with them. It's incredibly important to get curious with them. I mentioned earlier that it's okay that you and your child can go on a shared learning journey together, and that's okay. You don't have to have all the answers as a parent, especially when it comes to a topic like this. It's also important to keep it casual and fun too. Kids are very responsive, and they're also very receptive. They're very perceptive as well. And they'll know if you're sweating a little bit. They'll know if you're a little nervous. So it's okay to have fun with the topic as well. It's also important to listen to understand, what they're asking, and to not read too much into what they're asking as well. Just because they're asking a question that has to do with the queer community, or maybe has to do with clothing they want to wear, a toy that they want to play with, or a book that they might want to read. It's incredibly important just to really listen to what they're actually asking. Active listening can be incredibly helpful in these moments. You start to drown out maybe other narratives that might be entering in, and it's just incredibly important to just maybe slow down in those moments to seek to understand what they're really asking you for. It's also important to practice what you preach as well. Everyone likes to think, or many people I think like to think, that they're really strong allies, but make sure that you're practicing that in front of them as well. Not just in these conversations, but everywhere you go. You're interacting with your community at the grocery store, when you're out shopping, when you're picking up your kids from school. And it's incredibly important that they're always watching you. They're incredibly perceptive folks. And so it's important in front of them that you're leading by example. No judgments. You don't want to try to shut down a question that a child's asking, like, oh, I'll ask that later, or that's not a good question to ask. You want to dig into that question, and because when you start to shut down a question from a child, that's going to perhaps make them a little resistant to come to you with more questions. Creating that open environment for them to have those questions with you and to not have it shot down is incredibly important to the relationship between you and your child, but in particular for queer kids too, in setting them up for success in that open door policy with you very early on. And again, it's okay if you don't know. And so here we're getting into the nitty-gritty of what we're talking about here. It's your toolkit, and how are you going to, begin to action all this stuff? You've you've thought about your fears, you've talked about your fears to your partner or your caregiver support resources. You've understood where things are, but now how are you going to maybe execute this as a team? And it's really important to continue to build your like-minded network of parents and supports who are in this with you. They don't necessarily need to be more educated than you, or you need to be that resource for them, but know that they're on the same page, that you all support queer communities, you support queer people, you want to provide an affirming environment for everyone around you. And if it happens to be that your kid might turn out to be queer one day, that you're all going to be in it together to support them, regardless of their identity. One of the most overlooked resources, I truly think, are storybooks. And, it's ironic because I know that they've been in the news lately, in particular with Drag Storytime. But these books are so great at starting a conversation, of introducing concepts to parents and also to children as well, because they do them in such a light way. They do them in a way that is child-friendly, and it's easy to begin a conversation from there as well, and for you to introduce whatever concepts that you'd like into that conversation. One of the books that we share often at our storybook readings is Tabitha and Magoo, Dress Up Too, and there's a number of different books that I know Kids and Company have sent out to you over the last couple of weeks. I Like Myself by Karen Beaumont, Kindness is a Golden Heart by Charlene Chow, Your Special Voice by Temi Adam Malukin, and Love Makes a Family by Sophie Beer. And, those are all incredibly important storybooks. They all have lessons about how someone sees himself in the world, about the different types of families that are out there in the world. One of the other storybooks that I forgot the name of it, but that we partnered with and read at a Drag Storytime recently in Aurora, Ontario. It was a really beautiful book. There was really only one page that talked about different families, and it did it so well in that some families have two dads, some families have two moms, and some families have more than two parents or three parents. Those are just incredibly easy ways to introduce that concept to a child, and it really is a very easy way to open the door. So if you don't know how to address a conversation, or you don't know how to begin a conversation or address a question that your child might have, getting a storybook and doing a little nighttime reading together and having a conversation around that is, I think, one of the best ways to go about that. Community events are also very important to begin to expose your child to the community and to normalize interactions with queer communities as well. There's a number of family-friendly Pride festivals that are available, and also community events as well. We have our Pride Festival in Newmarket this weekend here in New York Region, Ontario, but a number of different community festivals happen throughout the year, and we'll have our booth set up there. We're just there to connect with parents and to connect with others who are looking for support resources, and finding those booths and going up to them and having a conversation with those folks just normalizes the idea of being around symbols like the pride flag and being around symbols like rainbows, that others are, trying to share other narratives around. And normalizing that experience and being able to talk about those experiences with your child in a positive way, it can be incredibly important. And those are also learning opportunities for them too. If you're comfortable, support a drag story hour. They're really beautiful events. We highly encourage you to go out to them. It's not like a standard drag performance that you would see elsewhere. They are tailored to kids. These are performers who work with kids often and work in family-friendly environments. And for folks who might have a concern about drag story time and drag story hours, to me, I like to best illustrate that by sharing the analogy of movies and TV shows. Different movies and TV shows have different ratings, and you're not going to show or have your child go to a movie that is inappropriately rated for their age, right? You can rest assured that these drag story hours are definitely rated G, at least here in Canada. That's our rating system, and they're great for kids. If there was an equivalent rating system, I should say. It's also important to inquire about words, but don't interrogate. So if you get a particular question and you're worried about maybe a word or phrasing that your child has in there, and this goes back to the point of no judgments, not reading into things too much. Kids learn different words all the time. I certainly didn't learn my swear words at home, and I'm sure a lot of you may have learned different words or different ways of saying things on a schoolyard versus at home, right? And sometimes, lessons that we don't want our kids to have are being taught on the playground amongst peers than in a classroom. So it's important to maybe better understand, what they think that word or phrase means, where they learn that from. In particular, you might hear kids at some point as they age say things like, "This is so gay, that's so gay." And it's incredibly important to address issues like that and conversations like that, because we know that that word in that perspective is being used as a negative, and we want to make sure that folks are not using it as a negative, that they understand what the impact is of that. And finally, one of the biggest tools that you're going to need in anything that you exercise and how you support your child is resiliency. You might need to exercise that with your judgment from other families and parents about your child or how you're raising them. And it's perhaps something that you've already had to exercise, because I'm sure those judgments about anything in the parent community really truly run rampant, whether it's a toy that you're buying for your child, or a choice in parenting, or how you're disciplining at home, or how you're even having a conversation like this. It's important. I think sometimes as parents, and I can't speak as a parent, but I certainly, I have, friends who are parents, and I can see that sometimes they compare the quality of their parenting to other parents based on what they're doing, how they're doing it, and trying to measure what those outcomes look like. But really, at the end of the day, everyone parents differently, and everyone has a different approach, because our kids are all unique. And so, whether that judgment is coming from within or from others, sometimes it's good to dismiss it and to try to bounce back as quickly as possible from those moments. And that resiliency can certainly help with those moments. And so in continuing your education and in continuing just your access to resources, there's a number of different resources out there in the world. When we talk about PFLAG in particular, PFLAG is an organization that's available nationwide in Canada and the US. We were once known as Parents, Family, and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, and now we use that word just as an acronym as a whole. PFLAG started because a mom wanted to better support her child. And there was a community who recognized her sign that she had at a Pride Festival in New York in the 70s. And that said, "Parents of Gays Unite in support of our children." And that's what really inspired PFLAG. And that's what this presentation is really all about, is uniting parents around supporting our queer kids and supporting the concept of allyship. And there's a website there for chapters in Canada. If you go to pflag.org, you'll get to the US version, where you can take a look at chapters that are available and local to you in the US. Also, just a quick note about resources and a story that I'd like to share, in particular with my mom. When I came out, I was 17, and we didn't talk for a little bit, but my mom was really trying to dig into resources to better her learning experiences. What she did was she went to chapters, she bought a bunch of books, she started reading, And a couple chapters into the first book she was reading, she noticed that the book was really about gay parents coming up to their straight kids. I always find that to be incredibly funny because, you're trying to, especially, 17, 16 years ago now, you're really trying to figure out, where these resources are, and you can easily make similar mistakes like that today, but there's so many more resources that can get you connected as a parent community to how to better support your kids. We have the Trevor Project that's available as well in the US. Its equivalent in Canada is LGBT Youth Line. And both offer phone support, text support services, and phone lines that are available throughout the day and available for folks to reach out to if they have any questions, particularly for youth. So you could always share that with youth who come to you, kids who come to you, or even share that with your parent communities and other resources and other folks who are looking to support. And finally, we can't have a discussion like this without even talking about, adding the concept and the behaviors of allyship to a discussion like this. A lot of these concepts and a lot of these points, I think, are very self-explanatory. When I think about allyship, I personally think about just being a good human being and wanting people to be their true authentic selves with me, because you're going to get the most out of them and their most authentic selves. And who doesn't want that? We want people to be authentic around us, and we want people to feel safe around us. And that's the whole point of allyship. We want to listen without judgment. We want to have an open mind with them and be willing to talk, and also maintain that confidentiality when we need to as well. Sometimes folks are concerned about how they're going to be judged with, a certain phrase or statement, especially as a parent community. If you're sharing something that's very vulnerable, or something might come out the wrong way sometimes too, we're all on our learning journeys at different points, and how someone might phrase things in a moment is certainly not cause for concern about judging them based on their character. It's a pattern of events that we're worried about. So being forgiving of folks in the moment, I think, is very important, and maintaining that confidentiality as well for sensitive conversations. It's also important not to make assumptions about gender and sexuality, and that goes a lot deeper into the interactions that you have with different people, especially when kids might be around, and the types of questions that you ask people too. I used to work at the Genius Bar at an Apple store, so doing tech support. And one of the biggest questions that would always make me uncomfortable when I'm interacting, or when I would be interacting with my customers, would be, "Oh, do you have a wife, or do you have a child?" And right then and there, those questions are rooted in an assumption based on my sexual orientation and my gender identity. And it makes me uncomfortable, because I then have to figure out, oh, well, do I share that I am gay, or that my partner's male? And how would that impact the conversation that I have with someone? And how does that then impact the power dynamic that I have with this person? Because in this case, they're the customer and I'm the staff member. And those are different power dynamics that really go about the world that you don't think about, that your kids are exposed to when they're present for those conversations. And when you normalize a question, like that and how it's phrased, we don't often associate it with the impacts that it can have with someone, especially since queer people aren't always visible, and people can, pass without, looking queer, or wearing, a rainbow headband, for example. And not even that would identify someone as a part of being a queer community. Someone could be an ally and wear that too. But it's important just to not make assumptions in those moments, and maybe move away from language that boxes a question into a particular perspective. If you use a question like, do you have a partner, or do you have kids, in that frame of mind, I'm certainly more receptive to answering a question like that, and that puts me more at ease in those situations. It's important as well that, when the time is right, when, the environment seems safe enough to do so, to, speak out and maybe challenge particular phrases or words that you hear in conversation too. Don't make assumptions, or you don't want to, allow something to go by, especially if your child is around too. You don't want them to be exposed to a particular phrase that is negative in its connotation towards the queer community or any marginalized community. Allyship is something that impacts and can impact and have a positive impact on a number of different marginalized communities in the world, and exercising something like that and intervening when you can and when you feel comfortable, I think is incredibly key, because you want that to be effective, but you also want to set a strong example for your children as well. I've talked about using neutral language a bit there. It's important to confront maybe your own prejudices and biases. Maybe you might be someone who's confronted with someone who, took issue with how you said something. And it's important to not be defensive in that moment, just to try to listen, to learn, and to understand, and to grow. I've been in those moments before. Many other people have been in those moments before. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means that you're on a learning journey, and that's okay, because sometimes we don't know the impact that words might have on certain individuals, or our phrase as well. It's important to try to display material too. There's going to be no shortage of it over the next few months with Pride festivals everywhere. We're in Newmarket later today and tomorrow all day, and we're going to have our buttons and our stickers and our pins everywhere, displaying messages like that of support, and visible items really can put people at ease, put people around you at ease, and you're promoting those items in a more positive way around your kids as well. I think that's incredibly important. And attending events throughout the year, maybe even hosting them too. Hosting your own little pride party with your neighbors and friends might be a good idea too, or trying to do it at future schools would be a really encouraging thing to see as well, and really trying to challenge that with perhaps the status quo in those areas, and even celebrating other community events as well. It doesn't just have to be about Pride Month in the queer community. It can be about other significant moments that are important to different communities throughout the calendar year. And it's also important, to believe that individuals, regardless of their sexual orientation and gender identity, we all deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. And regardless of someone's identity and someone's journey, we know what that looks like. We know what respectful discourse looks like, and just really trying to treat people as we would want to be treated, I think, is incredibly key as we move about our lives and as our kids watch us interact with other folks too. And so that brings us to the end of the presentation that I have. And I know Renee and we have a couple questions here, and I see some questions even in the Q&A as well. But perhaps we can start with any questions or comments that you have, Renee.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to start to read out some of these questions. Just give me 1 second here. Okay, my 6-year-old child was assigned female at birth and identifies as male, told us at a very young age. He views rainbow clothes as for girls. Everything he wears has to be very traditionally male colors. And I was wondering, how do you explain that something being rainbow is celebrating LGBTQ+ community and isn't just for girls?
That's a really great question. I think it's just really saying it and sharing the lesson, to be honest with you, of, this isn't just about, one particular community, and just really talking about, that symbols mean different things to different people. And for our community, this isn't just a symbol about the queer community. It's a symbol of love and respect, and that's what we're trying to spread. It's a symbol of visibility, and we want people to feel comfortable around one another. It's important to, I think, maybe talk about it from the perspective of someone who is a part of the community. My story that I think I like to share is, through my coming up process, there's different stages of it. And, for me to feel comfortable in wearing something rainbow in public or on a screen like this, or to go out in public with it, or to see a symbol like that, for me, it means that, I feel safe, and to see someone else wearing it, or to see it in a store sign, it means that I'm going to feel safe. And if you maybe want people to feel safe around you, not just through your words, an action that you can take is to have that with you. And for some folks, they associate that with safety, or that being, a safe person to go to.
Right. Okay, great. Okay, so for the next one, can you please share your thoughts on when it's appropriate for us parents to start affirming our kids' identity expression when it's different from their cisgender versus helping them to become comfortable with a cisgender identity?
Ooh, that's a really interesting question. I think that changes from child to child, because it's gonna show up in different moments in someone's life and in different ways. It might show up in a way where, you're at a Walmart and Sandra wants to play with some Star Wars figures instead of, with some Barbie dolls, or the reverse. In those moments, I think you just kind of go with your flow. I like to say that you want kids to kind of lead, their own journey at that point. You don't want to really worry too much about what they've chosen or question them on that. You could always, continue the conversation in that way. Like, oh, that's interesting. You want to play with Star Wars. What do you like about Star Wars? And find some commonality with your child too. Do you like Star Wars? Maybe they learned it from you. Maybe they're just trying to better connect with you, and it's not really about their gender identity or expression. Clothing, I think, is a really interesting thing too. How many times do perhaps we might wear clothes without knowing it that is of the opposite gender, and maybe looks a little bit different, whether it's around the house, if you're just doing some cleaning or whatever it might be. Your kids could pick up on that, whether you're wearing different colors and maybe they see mommy wearing more blue and more black, and that's okay too. Kids pick up on things around the world so much quicker and more easily than we, I think, perceive. And sometimes it's not about their gender identity or gender expression. Sometimes it's just better connecting with mom and dad. But other times, you don't really have to think about going into those conversations right away. You just kind of want to affirm what they want and try to provide that to them as much as possible. A story that I like to share and that I'm reminded of in this situation. So my brother, 12-year age gap. So when I was in high school, he was, I believe, 4 or 5 years old at the time, and he was in preschool. At Christmas, he wanted a My Little Pony as a part of one of his gifts, and my mom came to me and was like, "Should I buy this for him? Like, should I be reading into something? Like, one of my kids is gay. Is the other one going to turn out to be gay? Like, what's happening here?" And I just said, just buy the My Little Pony and see what happens. So Christmas comes. He unwraps all of his gifts, one of them being a My Little Pony. He plays with everything except that one. And so the questions continue to build. And he's not going to be back at preschool for another week or so. Preschool comes, he takes his unwrapped his unboxed My Little Pony, takes it to school with him, and he gives it to this girl that he had a crush on. So at a very early age, my brother was already trying to play the field, I like to say. And sometimes things just turn out to be like that. And that just is a story I love sharing because he's very similar nowadays too. But yeah.
Okay, so just more a comment from one of our parents saying that they found their best way to be an ally and to show support was to become a chair for their Pride employee resource group at work. So just like always, again, wanting to share suggestions. So not so much a question, but more a comment, and that's amazing. That was from Sarah. We have another question here. Do you have a suggestion for how to respond when a young child asks, "Is that a boy or a girl?"
I think that's a very interesting way, because you don't want to shut your child down right away. Like we know that as an adult, that's perhaps not a good line and questioning to have, but a child is innocent, and that's really based and rooted in what they understand a boy and a girl looks like, and maybe throwing the question back at them and asking, what do you think and why do you think that? What is your guess? And you don't want to encourage the idea of guessing someone's gender identity in the moment, but a question like that can really dig into what your child thinks a boy or a girl could look like. And that's when you can really break down that concept and say, it doesn't really matter what people wear, and you don't really need to worry about whether someone is a boy or a girl. I didn't think that, or when I go to talk to someone, I'm not thinking about if someone is a boy or a girl. I'm going to talk to them because I want to talk to them, or I'm going up to them because I want to be around them. And starting to really demystify that and kind of breaking down maybe, a concept that they're already worried about, I think is a great way. Sometimes you have to go into it with a bit of a confrontational question, but sometimes it's to seek to understand more. And as long as your intention is to seek to understand more and to really figure out what is it exactly that your child is thinking, it becomes easier afterwards to really address kind of where the roots of that thought is coming from.
Okay, great, great. Okay, next question. How young is too young to speak about sexuality with children?
Hmm. I like to say that, you want to be guided, I think. If you look at storybooks, for example, I think that when you're having conversations like this, it's okay to stay within the realms of where the storybook is going. And if your child is beginning to ask questions, perhaps younger than you're prepared for, trying to maybe frame things within that understanding, and within, where things are at educationally. You don't want to get into the mechanics of sex, I think, at a young age. I think that's, something that we all agree on, or would agree on, because it can be difficult to talk about things like that. But when it comes to sexuality, I think the storybooks really do a good job of starting to lay the groundwork that we're all different and we're all unique. And that, you have a storybook that says that there are families with two dads and two moms. And, that in a way is, talking about sexual orientation and gender identity without directly addressing the concept of like, yes, when some people grow up, they are attracted to someone who is more like them, or in their gender identity and gender expression, and that's okay too. But I think the storybooks in themselves nowadays just do such a great job of kind of lightening that type of conversation, and the whys start to come into place. You could always, if you know anyone in your circle who might be of the community, maybe seeing if they're comfortable to bring them into the conversation to better talk about, how they knew that they were gay at a certain age. For me, I just knew just based on, my friends having crushes on girls, and I didn't like girls. So for me, it's as simple as that.
Right.
It wasn't a choice. It was just something I knew internally about myself.
Right. Okay. So, someone is asking if you can suggest some particular drag story hours or drag story movies that are appropriate to children.
All drag story hours are appropriate to children right off the bat. And so, in terms of events at libraries, you can trust that whatever is happening at your local library has been curated very specifically for your kids. Librarians are always looking to make sure that the content that they provide to kids and families are age appropriate. And, that's the partnership that we have at Aurora Public Library here in York Region. So, and there's a number of different libraries through York Region here, Markham Public Libraries, Vaughan, that do drag story hours too. So trust that, especially if it's happening at a library or at a school, that it's definitely going to be appropriate for your kids. In terms of movies, I would say, in Canada, it might be easier to go through the rating system. And I think in the US, when you think about the concept sometimes of, particular censorship of things and where things might land in terms of a rating system differently down there, it might be more difficult to gauge that when you're looking at TV and movies in particular. But up here, I think using the Canadian rating system in particular is a good initial filter for that content.
Okay, perfect. So we've got another question from a family. Says they live downstairs from a family that are not LGBTQ plus friendly, and they also help with their childcare. And wondering if you have any advice about navigating the situation.
Ooh, well, that's a loaded question.
I know, that's a tricky one.
Yeah. You have to, I think the reality of that situation is you have to measure, the value of the convenience and the support that you have in having someone care for your child. In the practical sense of perhaps when you're not able to pick them up or you have to be away at work versus, and also the location too, you can't beat something like that in terms of location. But versus, what you want your kids to be around. And, that can be a very difficult thing to confront because now you're confronting yourself with what does this say about my character? And sometimes as parents, we have to make choices that are practical because the world around us just forces us into those practical items, in those practical choices and decision making, but you need to also think about what your kids might be exposed to. And, if maybe something is on TV and they're watching TV in that environment and there's something pride related or rainbow related that comes up and there's some negative comments that are made, your child's going to be exposed to that lesson and they're going to take that in, and that may present itself in some way down the road. And that's just a reality of what might happen in that situation. you have to prioritize what you want your child to be exposed to, and that's that's perhaps an easy but also not so easy decision when you're talking about the practical nature of that particular support. So I would recommend thinking about what your child might be exposed to in that situation. If you do have a co-parent, then maybe thinking about how you might want to talk about that type of conversation, with that support group, and figure out, whether they're willing to learn or whether they're not willing to learn.
Right. Okay, great advice. Along a similar line, how can we navigate conversations with family members or friends who may hold different beliefs or values regarding gender and sexuality?
This is, one of the more common things that we get at PFLAG, and sometimes those situations lend themselves to a point where family groups, especially when parents are here and they're here to support their kids who are coming out, who are trans, who are gay. Eventually it comes to the point where parents are making decisions about who their children are exposed to and who they go to in their families. It affects going to family events, family reunions. It impacts sometimes going to very important gatherings like Christmas or Thanksgiving or different holidays. And the reality is you gotta think about what your child is going to be exposed to and what you want them to be exposed to. And sometimes it means that you need to cut off some familial ties, and it's a very difficult thing to think about. You build these relationships over your lifetime, and then to think about that you need to cut someone out because they're not supportive of your child is a very difficult concept to think about, and to confront, especially if it has to do with your own parent or maybe a brother or sister. I think it's important to be realistic with those family members too, to say, I need to put my child first and foremost. And what you're saying, and perhaps your viewpoint, I think can be harmful to my child if they turn out to be gay, or if they are gay or lesbian or trans or bisexual or any other identity. And the words that you say, and the way that you carry yourself exposes them to a negative environment, and you don't want your child to be around that. And whether you're willing to go on an educational journey with that person and try to bring them along or not, or provide them with the resources and say, you're adult to your responsibility, it's up to you. But I would recommend trying to put the safety and well-being of your child first.
Next question. If a child wants to transition very young, should this be supported or delayed?
You have to look at the individual situation. And I think we also need to dig into what we mean by very young, because there are certainly situations where it's just not possible at a very young age, and no doctor or medical professional would be looking at medical intervention in those moments. Oftentimes when we talk about transition, folks are going to be first confronted with the concept of a social transition. So first, maybe changing a name. First, maybe looking at different pronouns. First, maybe thinking about appearance and maybe wearing different clothing or maybe a different hairstyle. And thinking about that social transition first is going to be key, because you don't want to worry about a medical transition right off the bat, I think. And there's also a lot of misconceptions around medical transition. And I don't want, my comments around don't worry about that to think that, that is something that is irreversible. It's not. There are many forms of medical transition that are completely reversible. When we're talking about hormones, we're talking about puberty blockers. Those are things where studies have shown that you do want to start them early because it can help with those feelings of gender dysphoria. But again, it depends on the person. Not everyone transitions the same way. Some people are okay with doing a social transition for a long period of time because they're thinking about what they want to do. And how they want to look, and maybe where they want medical intervention to look like. Not everyone goes through surgery for a variety of reasons. That's, perhaps the thing that I think parents think about the most and worry about the most. And it's also one of those misconceptions that are out there as well, that there are surgeries happening on kids. That is not happening. There are no cases of that happening. And it's just, completely made up. Any medical professional would want you to start in thinking about a social transition before anything else. And, I think that's one of the things to do first. Think about that social transition versus a medical one. And when you decide that medical intervention might be key and good, depending on how your kid is feeling and perhaps what they want to do, what they want to look like, maybe what they want to avoid through puberty, then that's when you want to continue having those conversations and thinking about what blockers and hormones might look like. But also those items are reversible if you decide, or if your child decides this isn't for me.
Right, great detailed answer. Okay, next one. So what are some of the signs that indicate our children may need professional support or guidance when it comes to their gender identity or sexual orientation? And how can we access appropriate resources for these areas?
In Canada, or in Ontario in particular, there's one resource called Rainbow Health Ontario, and those are medical professionals who have gone through specific training around sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, and I would recommend having a look at that first. Similar items like that aren't available everywhere in Canada, let alone the US. So I'm not, and it might differ state to state as it does here provincially in Ontario with that particular program. So if you're local to Ontario, that's something that I would recommend looking into, but I'm not too familiar with what things might look like individually elsewhere. But that might be a resource that's available to some. I think, sorry, could you repeat the question? I just want to make sure I get all of it.
Yeah, what are some of the signs that indicate our children may need professional support or guidance when it comes to their gender identity or sexual orientation?
So signs, they might not present themselves as related to, getting support with sexual orientation or gender identity, but when I think about, my own journey, and I think about when I started to think about myself and my idea of myself in the world, I began to withdraw, and I began to maybe not talk to my mom so much, and I was playing on my own a little bit more. I was out with my friends, but even around my friends, I wasn't very talkative. And when kids begin to withdraw, sometimes it's because they feel like they don't fit in. For queer folks, sometimes it's feeling like they have a secret to share and they can't share it, and they're trying to protect themselves as much as possible because they don't want people to find out the secret. I think it all starts at home. When you have such an open and affirming environment at home, and you're trying to show that everyone is welcome in your home, that that you're welcoming to all different communities, I think you're less likely to see those concerns present themselves at home, because people are going to be, your kids are going to be more open to that. It's difficult to figure out what that's going to look like at a young age. And, maybe it could be that they're hiding a toy that they got, and, and you found a Barbie that you didn't know they had, or they're maybe wearing something, or they're maybe in your closet and they're putting on makeup or something. You never know. In those moments, you could always go up to your kids and like, oh, like, what do you find interesting about my makeup? Or, oh, I didn't know you had this toy. Where'd you get it? And, how do you play with it? And trying to approach conversations like that as friendly as possible. That's probably where you're going to see it. But I think it's also very rare, because I think kids tend to, at least in my experience, they tend to just kind of share without a filter. For the most.
Right, that is true. Okay, the next one is, are there any specific challenges or considerations when discussing these topics with children from diverse cultural or religious backgrounds? And how can we approach this sensitively?
With a topic like that, I think it's important to recognize that we all come from different, backgrounds, and folks. Sometimes it's a matter of exposure to the community, and it's a matter of what that cultural exposure looked like for some, and it differs from community to community. Sometimes, when we talk about religion and we talk about different ethnicities, I think there's the assumption sometimes that there are certain communities that are less friendly to the queer community than others. But when you look at the root cause of everything, it's a misunderstanding, it's miseducation, it's misinformation, and it's stereotypes that really get in the way of that understanding. And it's not rooted in a true cultural belief system or a true religion belief system. It's rooted and kind of taken and exacerbated from, a particular line or a particular text or a particular concept. And I think kind of addressing issues based on those stereotypes and those misconceptions and those misinformation pieces is much more important than linking them to any links to culture or religion.
Right. Okay, Tristan, well, that's all the questions that we have. We want to thank you so much for this amazing Kidco talk. And we appreciate all your knowledge today and all of the services that PFLAG has to offer. We want to remind all participants that we will be sharing this webinar, and happy Pride.
Happy Pride.